დღეს ჩვენი ბლოგის სტუმარია ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანი და საინტერესო ადამიანი, ბრიტანელი მაიკლ რობერტსი, რომელიც არის კონსულტანტი მმართველობის, ევროპის ინტეგრაციის, მედია კომუნიკაციების სფეროში, ის ყოფილი ბრიტანელი დიპლომატია სლოვაკეთში, ასევე მუშაობდა ყაზახეთში, საბერძნეთში, თურქეთში, ბრიტანეთის საელჩოში და მისი გამოცდილება ძალიან საინტერესოა ბევრი თვალსაზრისით. ერთის მხრივ ის რამდენიმე წელია ატრენინგებს საქართველოში საჯარო მოხელეებს. ალბათ საინტერესო იქნება ისიც კი ვკითხოთ ბატონ მაიკლს რა პროგრესი განიცადა საქართველოს ამ წლების განმავლობაში. ასევე საინტერესოა მისი მოსაზრება ბრიტანეთის ევროკავშირიდან გამოსვლასთან დაკავშირებით და რას ფიქრობს ის Brexit's მომავალზე. So, good evening, Michael. It's a pleasure to have you here at Civil Council on Defense and Security, our research institute which tries to bring into discourse various interesting and important issues of international relations, mainly concerning international security, national security, and current challenges to that. And you're a very experienced person as consultant on governance, European international affairs. You're a former diplomat, and your sense and eye and reflection on current international development, as well as your ideas about the developments of East European or wide Eastern European countries like Georgia, let's say, in this way. So your experience, you're for many years observing the development of a situation here, democratization here in Georgia, as a consultant, but of course it's interesting for us, what is your view, what you see as a kind of achievement, what are the challenges Georgia, for instance, have in the way to Europeanization, European integration, democratization, and it's always interesting to listen to outside, how Georgia is seen by British person, and what do you think is the main challenge to this, to the countries like Georgia in this challenging environment? Even Brexit is one of the challenges I think we can identify.
Indeed, it is.
Indeed. So please, with this very short introduction, and thank you again very much. Please, floor is yours. Your ideas, your opinions.
Well,
welcome.
I would say I've come to Georgia late in my life. I've circled around it in a sense. I've worked in Greece, I've worked in Turkey, I've worked in Slovakia, and in all those countries, Greece, very soon after it emerged from the period of the colonels, Turkey, still sort of bordering on a military coup. Will there be a coup? Will there not be a coup? And trying to reform itself, sometimes fast and sometimes regressing. And in Slovakia, I was there at an interesting period, shortly after it joined the European Union. I saw what it had to go through, the changes it had to make in order to join the European Union. And that made me interested in what democracy is all about, what good governance really means. And when I came to Georgia, I found a country that had travelled a long way down that path, but still had things to do. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that democracy, the path to democracy is not a smooth path. You make progress and then you regress. You make a little more progress and then you come back. We all know this. Sometimes we're a bit blind to it. But in Georgia, I've seen progress and I've seen moments when things have appeared to take a step back. But one thing above all stands out about this country, and that is that Georgia, a small country of 3 million people.
Yeah, more. Like
Rather more than 3.5 million.
Yes.
Sorry, I forgot the half.
Yes.
3.5 million people, surrounded by some very big and, if I might say so, threatening countries. And what I find here is an oasis of freedom. And that freedom shouts loudly at me when I'm here. I really pick up the sense of people who want to break out of the past, who want to do their own thing, who want to do the best for themselves. And it's a very liberating feeling, not just for the people who live here, but for visitors too. So, imbued with that sense of freedom, someone like me looks at the situation and says, right, how can I, with my particular experience, lend a hand? How can I help people move forward along the line of democracy to better governance and so on? And above all, it seems to me that the most effective way is to help in building capacity, allowing people to experience, to share the experience that I and my colleagues have had, and to learn from that, so that when that, if that happens here in Georgia, they have a sense of the right way to go. So I see plenty of opportunity here, plenty of progress having been made, and also a sense, an openness to help from outside. I in a sense, I'm careful about taking too patronising an attitude. This is how it should be done. You know, people do democracy in their own ways, but there is help that can be
So what
found.
do you mean democracy in your own way? Because it's also interesting to know, because we think that there are some standards and values and standards ways to democracy. So because you can't do it without democratic institutions, without freedom, without... So is it this kind of understanding of your own way in making and creating and developing democracy? And where do you see this freedom? I mean, what indicates... kind of just 2 or 3 examples of indicating this sense of freedom in Georgia.
You make a good point, and in reality, of course, democracy requires you to meet certain standards, which are absolute, and rights are at the centre of those standards. You either have them or you do not. But if I may say so, you come at this issue from the perspective of civil society. I come at it from the perspective of government and working to help governments. And life isn't straightforward if you come from the perspective of government. Governing is not easy.
Yes.
You have to make compromises. You have to make compromises not least to bring people along with you. And I have seen plenty of situations in which good governments, democratic governments, are slightly, they almost cross the line in denying rights, in abusing rights would be putting it too strongly, but in denying rights. And one example that springs out at me is the issue of migration and the rights that everyone has to seek asylum in another country, competing with that inalienable sense that every nation has, that this country belongs to us, and that we should be wary of allowing people in whom we don't really know. I think this is taken too far, that generally people are rather too conservative when they take this line, and they overlook our obligation to look after people who need a new life. But it is legitimate to challenge whether everyone who arrives in a new country seeking asylum, it's legitimate to challenge them as to why they want to come. Is it for political reasons or is it for economic reasons? And if it's for economic reasons, they want a better job, they want more money, they want to get a university education for themselves that perhaps they couldn't get at home. Well, there is legitimacy in questioning whether or not asylum should be granted. There is, in a sense, some right for the receiving nation to question why do you want to come here and why can't you do that at home? And if you can't do it at home for purely economic reasons, well, does that really mean that we need to accept you? I have difficulty with that. I question it personally. But if a government chooses to take that line in order to keep in touch with the people that it represents, I can understand that. And the restrictive line that many governments take is unpleasant at times, hurts at a human level, but at a political level, I can understand why they take it.
So still, it's democracy in its own way. So you bring this example as different approaches of certain issues in democracies.
Yes.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. And how can you, your ideas about Brexit, so what is expecting UK in near future, and how you see these developments and the implications of Brexit on European Union as such, and other countries who aspire to be members of European Union. So, does it take any risk in terms of European kind of project itself?
I think it is hugely sad, not just for my country, the United Kingdom, but also for Europe. And that is reflected in the reaction of 27 other leaders who say, and I think they mean it, they say that they are terribly sad that the UK has decided to leave. I think it's not just sad, I think it's probably disastrous. Disastrous for the UK and pretty bad for the European Union too, and sends a very negative signal to those countries who for a long time have sought to reform in order to be able to join the European Union. So, for example, how do the countries of the Western Balkans respond to the fact that the country that has led calls for further enlargement of the European Union is now leaving the very same European Union? They must be wondering what is going on, and they're right to make that, to have that question in their minds. Now, I think what's been going on in Britain, sadly, is that a lot of people have got notions of imperial grandeur swirling around in their head. We in Britain have for too long thought that we should control our borders, should control our courts, and control the way our money is spent. Well, that's easy to say, it's harder to do in practice. In our interconnected, interdependent world, we have to look up to international institutions, sometimes supranational institutions, and there's no way of getting around this. Moreover, why do we actually want to get away from these institutions when they help to make us wealthier by encouraging trade, and in many ways they help us to tackle international problems such as migration, such as climate change. So to walk away from those systems is perverse when you actually want to make a difference on climate change. I think it's disastrous from that perspective. I think too it will be very quickly apparent that Britain outside the European Union will not have as many trading opportunities as it currently does, and therefore we will become poorer. I think unemployment is likely to rise. I think foreign investment is likely to fall away. Why, for example, should a Japanese or a South Korean car manufacturer want to make cars in Britain if it doesn't allow them to sell those cars on the in the European Union market? So economically speaking, I'm sure we'll take a big hit, and it's only becoming apparent how big that hit will be as we negotiate our way out of the Union. And then there are going to be political problems, above all in Northern Ireland, which has been peaceful for the last 20 years on the basis that there is no border, absolutely no kind of border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Once the UK leaves, something will have to go up there. Whether that's an actual barrier, a wall, a fence, towers, checkpoints, or whether it's simply a satellite in the sky, suddenly everything will need to be checked. Checked at the most basic level to see whether the correct tariffs have been paid as goods move from a country outside the European Union into the single market of the European Union. But also checked to make sure it meets certain standards, veterinary standards, health standards, environmental standards. And it will simply have to be there. But that doesn't work with the politics of Ireland, where the only reason we have peace is that there is no border. And my worry is that if any government tries to put some kind of barrier between north and south, violence will break out again. It is the biggest spur to a resumption of violence. I think that's a very real possibility. But it's not just in Northern Ireland that I have worries. In Scotland too, under our system of devolved government, the executive and the parliament in Edinburgh have the right to control agriculture, environmental policy north of England. And when we leave the European Union, those powers will instantly go to Edinburgh, to Cardiff. And we may well find that Scotland becomes a very different place. There is already a majority of Scottish people who wish to remain in the European Union. And when they discover that actually they have lost all the advantages, the economic, the political advantages of being inside the European Union, and it's making them suffer, they will very quickly decide we better go for independence. And I think that that is a phenomenon that we're going to face very soon after Brexit.
Yeah, but knowing all these risks and evidence that it could happen, so is still political elite in UK ready to take this risk, or how could responsible government behave in this regard, and what is the public discourse, and how, what's and implications on European Union itself and its unity. So maybe this sounds.
Well, let's look at what's going on in the European Union right now.
Mm-hmm.
We have today, it may already have happened, I'm not sure, a new government in Italy, composed of extremists from right and left. Yeah. We have a new government in Spain, where power has passed from the centre-right to the centre-left. We have real threats to the Eurozone, caused not least by a government in Italy that appears to want to leave the Euro. We have a trade war breaking out with the United States, and this is surely going to lead to some downward spiral of tit-for-tat tariffs that is going to hurt both economies enormously. And we are dealing with governments in Budapest and in Warsaw who question democratic norms, who want control of the judiciary, who want to bring all power, centralize all power in the hands of a very few people within government. These are actually bigger problems for the European Union than Brexit is. Unfortunately, in London, they don't see it that way. They see Brexit as the only issue to grapple with, and they can't quite understand why Europe doesn't listen more to what the UK has to say on Brexit. They can't understand why the Europeans aren't being more reasonable, when actually the Europeans are being entirely reasonable. They simply want to stop any other country deciding it's in their interest to leave the European Union. So I think our political leaders in London have misread the signals in Brussels. And meanwhile, we're embarked on negotiations that seem to be going nowhere. Time is running out. I don't think it would be possible to arrange or to agree any kind of future relationship with the European Union in the time available before we leave. And so we leave on a whim of hope, a prayer that the European Union will be nice to us once we've left and possibly relax trade barriers to allow us to go on trading freely.
Yeah, and at the end, I would... Sorry? Back to Georgia. At the end, I would like to ask you, I mean, what could you recommend to Georgian people, government in their way, I mean, they're struggling to democratization. So what would be your main recommendations or your main messages to us, to a relatively young country with the previous experience absolutely useless in building new country. I mean, Soviet experience, so it was kind of useless. So we started to build a new system, management, everything since independence with our European friends and Western friends. And actually, so all the achievements we have, mostly because of great help and support from Europe, United States, but still we are dragging. I mean, it's kind of one step forward, 2 steps behind if we analyze and reflect on current developments and on different factors, inside, outside, Russia, all those issues which very much concern us. So what would be your main messages to different audiences here, actually, but at the same time with the same
I think it's this. I think it's that freedom is precious. It's a precious flower, and you have to nurture it. Enjoy it, yes, but never, never take it for granted.
Yeah.
You have to care about it all the time and consider whether what you are doing, whether what you want to do is actually detrimental to the freedom of everyone that you so treasure. I think that Georgians should enjoy their freedom, but continually ask themselves whether they're not becoming complacent about it. So, for example, I take great joy in seeing demonstrations here on the streets of Tbilisi this week, which have forced the government to, shall we say, have a rethink, to make some changes. As a civil servant, I couldn't have dreamt of supporting a demonstration. I thought the job of all good Democrats was to stay at home and behave and not doing anything outrageous. Now, I'm absolutely convinced that it's right to go out onto the streets to demonstrate, to demand change from authorities who are getting above themselves. They say they're working for freedom, but are they? And you see them chipping away. So great to see demonstrations taking place, not just here, but in parallel in Armenia, in Slovakia, and in several other countries. That is good. So you have to fight for your freedom. And you have to continually ask yourselves whether the way your judiciary is working, the rule of law is working, the way that contracts are arranged, is this really free, or is it a system that is, well, at least borderline corrupt? Continually ask yourself, what is the right thing to do to preserve the maximum freedom for the maximum number of people? Why do people spend so much time in pre-trial detention, if indeed that is what happens? What is it that constrains opposition parties from having access to media prior to an election? What can you do to free up the business environment without giving tax breaks to your friends? Making the tax system transparent and fair. These are issues that we all struggle with in any democracy, and there is no blueprint for the perfect democratic model. We each find our own way to do it. But Georgia has made substantial progress, not least in the way your police system appears to work. People around the world look at that and say, yes, they've got it right. So enjoy those things, but nurture it. Continually check that you're doing the right thing to make sure that that precious flower always thrives and doesn't wither.
Thank you very much, Mike, for your very thoughtful analysis of current developments in our world, our region, and in Europe and in the world. And I think your messages are very important. ჩვენთვის ძალიან დიდი პრივილეგია მაიკლ რობერტსის სტუმრობა ჩვენს ორგანიზაციაში, მისი მოსმენა, მისი გამოცდილების გაზიარება და მთავარი რაც გვითხრა მაიკლმა, რაც მისი მრავალწლიანი დაკვირვების შედეგია საქართველოზე და ზოგადად აღმოსავლეთ ევროპის ქვეყნებზე, ეს არის, რომ საქართველო ნელ-ნელა თავისუფლდება თავისი საბჭოთა წარსულისგან, ნელ-ნელა ირღვევა ის სისტემა, რომელიც ამდენი წელი ხელს უშლიდა დემოკრატიზაციის პროცესს და რომ ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანია ამ გათავისუფლების პროცესის კვება დემოკრატიული ღირებულებებით და ამავე დროს განვითარებით და ჩვენი სწრაფვით, ასე რომ ვთქვათ, განვითარების და დემოკრატიისკენ. მადლობა მაიკლს კიდევ ერთხელ და ჩვენ იმედი გვაქვს, რომ კიდევ გვექნება საშუალება მას გავესაუბროთ. მადლობთ.